Welcome to Redefine the Circle, a podcast where we discuss all things pitching. I'm Ashley Sunshine, co-owner and head of pitching development at S2 Breakthrough. In this podcast, we're going to highlight topics that focus on how to maximize your pitchers now. We're going to discuss some of the trends that we've seen at S2 Breakthrough and talk about how we use data to create systems and training approaches that are specific to each pitcher. It's so important for us to continue to share this information and facilitate discussion within the pitching community so we can keep evolving as coaches and ultimately grow pitching into something it's never been before. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for joining the quest to redefine the circle. Hi everyone, welcome back to Redefine the Circle. I'm Ashley Sunshine, co-owner and head of pitching development at S2 Breakthrough. This is the start of Series 4, and I'm really excited to kick off this series because in my mind, this is maybe the most cohesive of all of the episodes or all of the series that we've really launched up until this point, meaning it's really an opportunity for me to take a lot of the concepts that I've talked about throughout each series and really pull them together to show each of you, our listeners and our viewers, what it really is, what it looks like for an athlete to sort of be in the S2 Breakthrough system or process. So we're going to talk about how things like assessment and programming, how things like periodization all come together to then build a platform or build what we call a training roadmap for each of our pitchers. And so for each of these, in Series 4, in each of these episodes, I'm going to lay out a specific case study where I really just walk you through, okay, what did we see from this pitcher? What did the assessment tell us? What was going on in her pitching motion? What were our goals for her? How did we attack them? How did she handle that? How did she respond to those training environments that we created for her? And really basically give a very in-depth look into the S2 Breakthrough process, obviously specifically from a pitching standpoint. So this is exciting because I think this is a great way to kind of take the nuts and bolts or the pieces of each series leading up to now, put them together and have a much better understanding of how we do what we do here at S2 Breakthrough. So okay, let's start case study number 1 today in episode 1. We are going to talk about a high school level athlete who is high level, no doubt about it. One of the top pitchers in her class. She is a sophomore this year, 2024 grad, and we've been working with her for a little over a year. No doubt about it, in her initial assessment, it was December 2020. During that time, she was, high velocity, basically about mid 60s, low to mid 60s, but able to reach mid 60s, had backspin. So she had a rise with true backspin about 2 to 3 inches, could throw a curve, could throw a fastball and change up. So she had both backspin and topspin. There's no doubt there was something special about this athlete. She was able to train, so she has a very particular circumstance where she is not in a high school season. So when we met her in December of 2020, she had all of that time between January all the way through May to really treat as true off season. And so as you know, like that's kind of unheard of for young pitchers. Normally, it's high school ball, right into summer ball, right into fall ball, right into camp season. Our time with them that they really even consider off season is so small. So this athlete certainly has a different circumstance, which ultimately really benefits her. So, what we saw in initial assessment is that she needed better strength and conditioning. She was a little bit unstable. We talked about how the velocities in which she was producing, her body wasn't really stable enough in the pitching motion to be able to sustain that or handle that, I should say manage it and stay pain-free. So we really took an approach to make sure that we were feeding the right strength and conditioning program for her, first and foremost. Essentially in her pitching motion, even though she was really high power, high velocity, she wasn't a great rotator. And so we were really trying to get ahead of her having arm pain or her starting to have some back pain, hip pain, just because of the high velos and without a great training base. So she made a ton of progress, not only because she was fully committed into the S2 Breakthrough system, but in addition to that, she had that full off season. She had 5 full months really of off season, really leading into a preseason time frame, which was really unique to her. So she made great progress. So what I want to talk about today and what I want to show, I'm going to show a lot of examples on my computer today. So for those of you who are listening only, as always, if you have an opportunity to go back into YouTube and watch these examples, I think it's really important to do so. So I'm going to basically go through where this athlete was by the end of this off-season timeframe, about May of 2021. And then she does not live locally. And so we were not able to see her a ton between summer and fall, just because of being in season, traveling so much, and then camp season, college camp season. And so it wasn't until end of December of 2021 that we really were able to have another true eval of her. And I want to show sort of what happened during that process, what things changed about her during that time frame, and then what we've done in response, how we've really laid out a new roadmap for her based on really where she was. So let's turn our attention to this initial visual here. And what we're going to be looking at is just this end of May or mid-May time period versus the end of December time period that I just referenced. So the top portion here of this visual you're going to see is mobility. The bottom portion here is going to be movement capacity. It's a portion of our movement capacity, which I'll explain in a bit, which is really just about trunk control. If you're unfamiliar with these concepts, certainly go back and listen to some of my previous episodes where we kind of go into the assessment process in detail. And this date, as you'll see over here on the lower right, is it's the end of October. And the reason for that is because we run our movement capacity assessments every 3 months, every 12 weeks, just to allow for training adaptations to occur. So this was sort of the assessment date that was closest to end of her season. So I wanted to pull these up for comparisons. So essentially when she came back, she said I'm fatigued, I'm tired, but I still feel like I'm throwing really hard. I think I'm really, I'm doing well. But when I went to some of the college camps, I was getting hit pretty hard, and I don't really know why. That's atypical for me. So we're like, okay, let's get back into this assessment process. You're about to kick off your next off season. Let's see where you are. So revisiting this visual, she had completely clean mobility here on the upper left when she went into the summer season. And by the time we came back at the end of this fall season, camp season, we could see that she had some regressions. Nothing insane, but some regressions with her ability to rotate, particularly her ability to create some segmentation on that dominant side, the right side. Some issues with ankle mobility, meaning her ability to put force into the ground initially, and then some shoulder flexion, meaning her lat mobility. So this tells me right away when there's lat mobility that's decreasing, that likely the trunk is getting in poor position in the motion, and the arm is really taking the brunt of the motion. It's taking the brunt of the demands of the motion, I should say. So right away we could see this isn't crazy coming off of so many months of season. We're talking June, July, August, September, October, November. I mean, 6 straight months of just playing. The body is going to unravel. And I've mentioned this in previous episodes, but our data is clear as day. Our athletes, so we're talking specifically about pitchers, but this really expands across all position players, hitters, etc. But when we're talking specifically about pitchers, our data shows that while in season, mobility, movement capacity regress. They only continue to regress. So to the extent at which we have our young or high school level athletes playing games, or not even games, but that if they're not in games, they're being expected to pitch live, they're being expected to perform in college camp settings. If we are asking them to 12 months of the year be pitching at high intensity, that means 43 feet for maximum levels of velocity, and to perform, we have to understand that we are never allowing them to get better. So for all college coaches out there, as long as that is our system and there is not a sufficient amount of time for athletes to be off season, then what you can expect is that what you see from a freshman in high school, that you are likely going to see something very, very similar out of her just 3-4 years down the road, because there is not a platform right now. There is not a system for athletes to go into off season and to truly develop. And again, very rarely do we even see athletes maintain what they've built going into season during season, because it's so demanding and it's so long. So the approach we take at S2 Breakthrough is we have really aggressive sort of in-season type of training models to help our athletes do the best job they can, just being able to preserve the body throughout that time period. So keep that in mind. That's obviously just something that's a little bit maybe off topic, a little bit of branching off of today's discussion, but I want to really highlight that. I think something that's really advantageous to this athlete specifically today is that she does have the opportunity to create off season between really December around the holidays, but January through May, which is so unique and so critical for her success. So again, let's just recap. We see in this visual, she had regression in mobility as we would expect. And when it came to movement capacity, I'm looking only at tasks that were on the ground, meaning how well did she manage the trunk? How well did she stabilize it? How well could she move it? When we were looking at exercises on the ground, and then how strong was her anterior core? After this, we just look at tasks in the air. Essentially, those are progressions of everything that we just talked about. So for the sake of today's discussion, I just wanted to look at on the ground and anterior core here. This basically is showing us in this early phase of the motion during weight shift and load, when the athlete is unraveling into that early launch phase, can she control the body, or should we expect the trunk to be unstable at that point? Really, it's then the anterior core that helps her put the brakes on at the end of that launch phase and start to drive this sort of overhead movement and create this in the air phase. So I want to know, in this first half of the pitching motion, is her body going to be able to hold up, or are we going to start to see some regressions here? And as you can see, it's nothing insane. So this is a really highly trained athlete, a really, really great athlete. And so I wouldn't call any of these severe, but we do see some regressions here on the ground, meaning that she couldn't quite control her posture or her trunk when her feet were connected to the ground. And then there was certainly a regression in anterior core. Okay, so that tells me right away, I know we're looking at just some sort of minor regressions. Posture isn't holding up. It's breaking down earlier in the motion. As a result, we're probably not rotating very well or very efficiently. So that's what that information gives me. When we then went on, I'm going to shift our focus here into her biomechanics analysis. And the point of this discussion is really not to make sure everyone knows how to read biomechanics analyses, but I just kind of want to point out some of the really obvious pieces and things that were important to this athlete's story. So a regression in movement overall, her body's not able to access the same positions and ranges of motion. It's not able to stabilize as well following this sort of 6-month in-season time frame. And so how was this manifesting itself in her motion? And so one of the main things that we really saw, I'm going to drag this through so you can kind of look at her motion here. And one of the main things that we saw is that when she was loading, she really was sort of losing that stability in the ground. And what was happening as a whole, she was sort of not able to put as much force into the ground during the load. So when she got to the end of this launch phase where arms are extended to the catcher, what we were seeing is that right away she was accessing maximum extension through the back. So instead of being nice and neutral in posture, this is that anterior core concept. If you turn your head to this sort of green graph right here on the chest side, you can see that big dip means that she lost posture. We would look at that close to zero when it's neutral, as we would want to see. And in addition, she was just flying into rotation. So over here on the bottom left, you'll see pelvic rotation was close to 90 degrees. So basically it was her max. She just flew right into max rotation right off the rubber instead of this sort of slow, controlled unraveling effect. So this absolutely matches. Not putting appropriate force into the ground, not being able to really command this like sagittal or forward plane in her launch, and instead everything was just immediately driving into rotation. So the repercussions of that, or the consequences of that, are that because she accessed sort of that extension move or that extension posture so early in the motion, I'm going to follow this. By the time she would get to layback here, now take a look at where she is. This is where we would actually want to see a pitcher, go from neutral at the top of their arm circle and then start to get into some extension to allow the arm to slot. And so you can see, because she lost posture so early, that she was in neutral posture. We're at 5 degrees, positive 5 degrees, no extension here, no room for that arm to slot. No room for that arm to create appropriate segmentation. And this screams, without even looking at ball flight data, this screams a lack of variability in spin direction and in brake. So that's what biomechanics showed. Obviously, we also have high-speed video to be able to see that a little more clearly, not sort of on an avatar or robot version. But that is how it connected to the initial story of what happened with her assessment. Okay, so now let's take a look at what was her ball flight data. And I have a little bit of comparisons here. So I still have this end of May or mid-May time period, right before the summer season started, and then this reassessment that we gave her at the end of December. So when we're looking at these dates, let's just first look at the trend in velocity. You can see her velocity trend. Now, this is only when she was S2. Typically, these numbers maybe a tier lower than she usually throws at home. She's a little bit more pushing upper 60s. But either way, you can see during that time frame, the velocity trend is neutral. This is why. So she, at the time, did not have access to ball flight data, did not have access to Rapsodo at home. And so she knows she's throwing hard. She's getting hitters out all summer long. She's thinking like, I'm doing great. Maybe some excessive soreness and fatigue as the season was going on, which we help her manage through. And then really it wasn't until she got into this college camp setting, which was a little bit more October, November and December really, where she was like, okay, I'm starting to get hit hard. Like maybe my pitches aren't as strong as I think they are. And she wouldn't have known that essentially without ball flight data. Again, she's a really powerful, strong pitcher. Velocity is stable. But when we were able to obviously get her ball flight data remeasured, it was able to really complete that story for her. So let's now take our eyes down to the bottom of this graph. And what we're going to see again is this May date on the left and then the comparison date, the 29th of December here on the right. Here was the data that we were looking at here. She was going into season. She had about +3 on that rise ball. No doubt about it. She threw that pitch hard. That was her pitch. Able to keep a fastball with some topspin to sort of offset that, a little bit of curve, which was bullet. You can see she really was able to create some separation in her pitches. And you can very obviously see that she has the ability to create multiple spin directions. And maybe the amount of separation between these pitches is not there yet, meaning it's not maximized yet. But you can see at this point, she was the end of her freshman year of high school. We are really looking good, particularly with the velos that she was looking at. Now let's take our eyes to this graph over here toward the right, which is December 29th. All of her pitches were topspin. All of them are clustered. This is exactly what we see for the majority of high school pitchers across the country. Regardless of what they are calling their pitches, regardless of the pitch label, the pitches are doing the same. They're spinning in the same way. They are not moving. They're not breaking. And this is so important to see. And the pitchers don't know it. How would they if they didn't have ball flight data? In our experience, when we do assessments for pitchers, ball flight data is pretty steady. So this is not like if someone comes to us and we say, they're like, okay, it was my off day. And so they go to a camp, for example, and there's ball flight data. And they say something like, well, usually my rise is working. What they're usually referring to then is that like the command over that pitch, the locations of those pitches. We do not see fluctuations in the spin profile because this is linked to the arm slot they can get in, the trunk posture that they get into. These are things that are a constant for them. And so someone's pitch profile regarding how the ball spins and ultimately how it breaks is something that, day by day, week by week stays consistent unless you're actively trying to intervene. You're implementing a training program to actively change that. So this is what we saw, and I think this was really eye-opening. Here's a pitcher that considers herself to be one of the top pitchers in her class in 2024, and she came in and saw, okay, my movement, mobility, and overall stability regressed during season, to be expected. And honestly, it wasn't that bad. So, so that's what I can see first and foremost. I see what it's done to my motion as I'm throwing at high intensity. I just don't have the stability to manage that. So essentially the trunk, it's extending really early because I don't have the anterior core to put the brakes on. I'm over rotating because I'm not able to put force into the ground that I need. So these are the things, how that lack of stability and mobility is affecting my pitching motion. But then this is how that's affecting my arm slot. And now look at my ball flight data. The reason she was getting hit hard in these college camps is because she didn't have anything special anymore. She didn't have anything unique about her pitch profile, about any particular pitch. And so, that's upsetting to a young athlete, really to an athlete or a pitcher at any level. But I think the most important thing is what we do here at S2 Breakthrough is not only do we show all of this information, we make sure that we can communicate it in a way in which it connects. So she can see that whole story and how it's related. And then following that communication piece, We create a roadmap, a training plan. Here is what we're going to attack first, okay? And that is really what I want to really be clear about in today's episode. What do we do post-assessment after we tell this story, which no doubt about it is so powerful for an athlete to be able to see those pieces come together in order to tell her story. But what do you do next? That is the piece here that is super, super critical. Redefine the Circle is brought to you by Rapsodo Softball. Whether it's at the plate or in the circle, Rapsodo delivers all the data needed to enhance your players' development and to give us a platform to become more informed and better coaches. Rapsodo pitching is absolutely critical when it comes to maximizing your pitchers. In addition to measuring velocity, pitchers and coaches get a detailed look at all of the ball metrics that influence break. Spin rate, spin direction, gyro degree, spin efficiency. Together, these metrics tell a story about a pitcher's data profile. And to grow that profile and ultimately maximize what that pitcher can become, understanding the metrics is a must. Rapsodo not only provides high-level feedback in the moment, but also creates back-end reports so coaches and athletes can visualize and fully understand the entire story and how it's progressing. Rapsodo is such a powerful tool. Instant data, relevant metrics, innovative visuals, and don't forget the in-app slow-mo video that allows pitchers to watch their pitching patterns right alongside the ball flight metrics they yield. Bottom line, Rapsodo is a must-have in the world of player development. See the data, feel the results with Rapsodo's softball technology. So the next slide here, I just kind of wrote out a table just to try to make it a little bit clearer for those of you who are watching and listening to be able to follow along. But here's the story that I told this particular pitcher. Here is what we're going to focus on. In this sort of first month or two, when you're in the early portion of your off season, our focus is going to be on patterns. It has to be. The way to attack patterns is to come back from such high intensity throwing. So we have to detach from the concept that the way to get better at pitching is to just throw more and more and more at high intensity, basically get on the rubber and throw and throw and throw and throw. The more you do, the better you get. That is false. When the body is breaking down in posture, when you're on the ground, when it doesn't have the anterior core, it doesn't have the mobility, in high intensity throwing, meaning full intent from the rubber, 43 feet, the motion is going to unravel. It's going to blow up, essentially. And so there's nothing about that is about training. We have to bring the environment back down to low intensity, reteach the body how to stabilize well, how to get in solid posture, how to rotate well, and sort of retrain its role within the motion, and then ultimately retrain the arm. Remember, if the trunk is lacking in the motion, then the arm will take on that responsibility. If the trunk starts doing a better job or contributing more to the motion because it's more stable, it can rotate better, then the arm only has to take care of itself, meaning it just has to get decelerate itself rather than trying to decelerate the energy from the whole body. And that's really where ball flight data can be born. So let's take a look at this roadmap that we created for this pitcher for her to understand clearly where you're headed, where we're starting, what you can expect from this first program moving forward. Okay, so patterns, what I just talked about. Increasing volume and the cycling of prep and low intensity plyos. So prep work is non-throwing exercises. It's where our pitchers learn what it means to put force in the ground, what it means to create muscle tension, how to load the backside of the body, how to then work grounds up as they're trying to get into the transition between the load and the launch phase. These are all just drills and exercises that we do that don't involve a ball. They might involve holding goblets in the chest to make sure their anterior core is stable. They might include pulling bands for stabilization. They might include holding med balls and trying to posture up and use med balls against a wall to activate anterior core. They look exactly like the motion. They just really concentrate on this concept of what should my body be doing, specifically what should my trunk be doing in load, and how does it transition appropriately into launch phase, holding tension where it's supposed to. So a lot of work on those details. And then plyos, which are an absolute staple, as anyone who is listening to this podcast today should know, absolute staple in S2 programming. Plyos are about feel and about proprioception. So getting the body to now attach the concepts that we are really emphasizing and challenging in prep work, to then bring those concepts into the pitching motion, we use plyos. We throw them at low intensity. We change start types. I have plenty of episodes and videos out there where we talk about exactly how we use plyos for this. But it's difficult to write a program when a pitcher is being expected on the weekends or during the week to compete at a really high level, to make the majority of her training program about prep work and low intensity plyos, because the reality is it doesn't match the demands of what's going to be asked of her in the game. This is why off season is critical. The way to get to the root of issues is to go all the way back to the patterns, meaning the way where the trunk is going wrong, and attack that. And the way to do that is to get to low intensity work. So having this time period, having this freedom to really put patterns at the forefront of training is how pitchers get better. And I can't shout that any louder, that the extent at which we are saying more, throw harder, we're putting them in a position to try to survive, not to go back to the roots and truly grow and develop. So for this pitcher, that was the strategies in which we were going to use to focus on her patterns. We were going to look at her trunk rotation and posture, meaning making sure that she wasn't flying into max rotation early and making sure that she could be neutral in posture, not an extension by the end of that launch phase. We could look at that through video. So if she was here at S2, of course, we could look at that through our wearable sensors. But since she was going to be just sending me video from home, we can look at this through video. And that's really how we were, in between her visits here, we were tracking that. Does it look like essentially you're controlling rotation a little bit better in launch because of how well you're putting force into the ground early on? Are we able to activate anterior core a little bit sooner because of how you're loading? And can we get a neutral posture? We're looking for these things. And once we do, then what we expect is that if the early part of the motion is cleaner, then as we get overhead and we transition from sort of the front half of the motion to the back half of the motion, now we expect to be in better posture. Will you lose a little bit of posture, neutral posture as you get overhead? Yes. But that's why everything leading up to that is so critical. And so our assumption, just based on all of the training and everything that we've measured here leading up to this point, we know that when you clean up that first half, we would expect trunk to be in better position when you get to the back end of the motion, which allows for a better arm slot, which allows the arm essentially to contribute more. So once we felt like we could accomplish this was not like, okay, this week, this is what you're doing. This was in this first program, which for us at S2 Breakthrough is a month long. It's 4 weeks long. So we write week 1, these are your 3 workouts. Week 2, you repeat those. Week 3, you repeat those. Week 4, you repeat those. It's a training program approach. We want to make sure that we give the brain and the body enough time to truly make adaptations. And when we felt like we accomplished those, when she felt like she accomplished those, then we could move on in the roadmap. This was not, at the end of this month, we're moving on regardless. No, this is what we're trying to accomplish. If in 2 weeks it looks better, let's add the next piece of the roadmap in. If in 4 weeks it's not better, we have to stay on it. We'll make some changes. If it looks like we're getting better, maybe we just need more time. Maybe we need the program to be more aggressive. That is all just up to the athlete and based on how her body is responding to the program itself. So she did appropriately make those changes and pretty fast. Again, this is a high-level athlete. And so the next phase of her roadmap was here, the variability of arm action. So basically there was a lot of stiffness in her arm. We saw her ball flight data and everything was exactly the same. Basically because the trunk was not stable enough and was not rotating well, was in poor posture, then the arm was so stiff because it was taking on the role of stability and trying to decelerate all of the energy from the body at the end of the motion. Therefore, you can think about it as it lost its art form. It lost its ability to segment, to stay whip-like, to have this sort of like very fluid whip action or arm action as it's going from acceleration to deceleration. And that is when everything just starts to cluster from a ball flight standpoint, cluster and look the same. So we wanted to say, okay, now that we have the trunk contributing more to the motion, Now let's make sure the arm knows you don't have to go overboard. It's time for you to understand how to stay relaxed, how to stay fluid. You don't have to take on the tension that the trunk is supposed to be taking on. You don't have to take on the brakes or the decel at the end of the motion because the trunk is going to do that. And so we added this piece into her program where it was about varying weights of balls for her overload because we want to slow it all down, really emphasize or promote segmentation of the arm. And all of this is done at low intensity. Why? Because we still want the trunk to be in an environment where it's doing its job. So now that we know the trunk is trained to do a better job at low intensity, we're now adding the arm piece. And what I was asking her to measure is velocity and ball height. And not velocity for like peak velocity, but when she would get to high intent, what I wanted to see was that her velocity range was within range, probably one tier down from what I know her typical max range is, as I would expect. If we're training in low velocity, then I don't expect her to be tapping into super high velocities, but she should be within range, meaning she's getting enough power into the motion, she's getting enough energy into the motion, but that the arm is staying relaxed enough that she can accomplish unraveling in different times. She can start to see that art form coming back. I can unravel earlier to keep the ball down in the zone, a little bit later for more middle or neutral, and then even later, unraveling meaning when I transition from upper to lower arm. And the only way to have that level of command over height of the ball is to have a sense of command and control over your arm action as it's unraveling. The only way to do that is if the trunk is holding up its end of the deal. So this was our way of making sure, if you're throwing really low velo, maybe we're just essentially going too low intent when you're on the rubber. So we want to make sure that as we're going up to high intensity, we're training a lot at low intensity. And when we throw some reps at high intensity, we can really sort of maximize whatever we have at that moment. And the arm is still able to sort of maintain its art form. And the way that we're measuring this, obviously, is just Rapsodo or radar, depending if she was here or at home. And then height tracking, really easy. Okay, and these next three, you got to throw 3 down in the zone, 3 up in the zone. And usually what we see is that when the arm is taking on the role of the trunk with stability, with deceleration at the end of the motion, everything is like middle up. Like they just are so stiff in that arm that they just fly past that timing mechanism. It's not like we've talked about it like release point. Release point, I think in my mind, it really links to this concept of like snapping the wrist at a particular time. So that's not a concept that I really gravitate toward. It's more of like the timing at which the upper arm then tells the lower arm to go. It's that unraveling. It's like time to decelerate. That's how I think about it. And that, again, that process is really dependent on making sure the arm isn't taking on more demands or more workload than it has to. Okay, so moving from there. So I will just preface this by saying this pitcher did an incredible job. This was a highly effective training plan and roadmap for her. And she just, like within 2-3 weeks, we were going to the next round, the next round, the next round. It was incredible. And this is probably faster than I've ever seen an athlete make change, but she is a high-level athlete, and I think she was able to come here once a month. I was able to really dig and see exactly what I thought she needed in her plan and in her program. And I think just a combination of like we really nailed it for her. We really nailed the training modalities and techniques and strategies that she needed. We nailed how to measure them. We were able to communicate them effectively to her. She's super disciplined in her training regimen, and she just took off from here. So I'll preface this with saying she actually was able to just come through all the way through this. And so I'll just continue with showing like what next? Then what did we focus on? So after we knew, okay, the arm has this ability to now unravel and it has its art form back, let's get back into backspin development or redevelopment really for this athlete. So now we are adding weighted softballs, not just overload plyos, but weighted softballs into her regimen. We would go like starting at 10 ounces and work our way down 10, 9s, 8s, and ultimately get to 7. So she just continued to have a sense of feel for different timing, slowing the arm down, segmenting the arm, how to resist rotation of that forearm. And again, staying at low intensity. This is all a concept of like, we want to retrain the brain and the body. How do it's supposed to be feeling? And the way we know how to do that is when it's in an environment where it can do it well. So she just started to implement a lot of weighted balls. And so when we measured, what we did is we looked at low intensity and high intensity. I will say that at this point, she saw how critical it was for her to have access to ball flight data. It was really alarming to her to have seen her ball flight data regress to the degree it did over the course of summer, fall, into winter. And so she purchased her own individual Rapsodo. And so she was able to effectively measure ball flight at home, which was a critical piece, I think, for her to be able to keep progressing through this roadmap. So what happened was I asked her, when you get to low intensity and you're training this, you're going to label this pitch, custom 1 when you're throwing rise ball at low intensity. And then you come back and let's just label it, normal rise at high intensity. And let's take a look. Basically, when a pitcher is able to produce the right spin in low intensity, it's not an arm concept when it's not translating at high intensity. It's a trunk concept. It just means that at that high intensity, the trunk is blowing up or is losing its posture, losing control, so much so that the arm can't do its job. It can't tap into what it needs to. And so let me just kind of swipe over here and take a look. I actually had posted this on Twitter. I created a thread just to kind of walk you through. Here's an athlete that I had that's really approaching pitch development through low intensity work, which is just critical. It is how we attack learning pitches here, not wrist snaps, because we know that that is not reality. What we do is that we make sure that we understand, is it a pitch or is it a spin direction that the pitcher can actually accomplish, which is linked back to her trunk, her assessment results. And if so, then this is what we're going to do. We're going to put it in an environment where the trunk is doing its job and then let the arm start to feel what it's like to segment appropriately, to unravel in the right timing, to produce the right spin. So here's just an example. Let's look over here. This is just OT, just other. So this was her trying to throw a rise ball and get backspin at low intensity. And you can see pretty successful, some with like bullet backspin, some with pretty good backspin. And then this is high intensity. So it started to grow. I think this was maybe a week or so in. The first round, she was about 50-50, which I did not include here. But the first week she did this, she was about 50-50 at low intensity and none at high intensity. And then this was the second week where then she was getting better at it, a better feel and understanding of it at low intensity. And you could see it was starting to translate. Then I included, I think this was a couple of days later, but really this was sort of indicative of like the switch for her. Every time that she was throw these, for the most part, outside of maybe one outlier, whether it was a misread or just something a little bit off, she was successfully producing backspin at low intensity and then could come back and start to translate it. So we just watched this process. I'm watching her data on the back end, and she's obviously able to see it. She knew what to measure and when and why. And this was the approach that we took in order to get her back into throwing backspin. And so it was like, okay, now that you can do it at low intensity, let's see its translation at high intensity. Let's just keep going back and forth, back and forth. And then we moved into the next phase. Once that looked really stable, 100% of the time she could throw backspin from a combination of getting back into the right strength and conditioning, then being able to sort of attack, spend enough time with prep and low intensity work that her trunk was in much better position. And now the arm has the ability to really unravel in the right timing to be able to throw that rise ball. So we moved into, I'm going to go to this fourth line here, that she wanted to work on backspin control and then topspin growth to see if we could take that topspin concept and then expand it, basically this either fastball or drop ball, be able to expand that to create a little more separation between these pitches. Now, had she only gotten through this backspin development or backspin control going into June of this year, we would have been thrilled. We would have been thrilled to know that she got back to where she was, but she hammered that concept. And we were only at the end of February, so it only makes sense. It's time to move on. It's important to understand this is not laid out like, again, this is month 1, this is month 2, this is month 3. You have to just let the athlete sort of her response dictate what's next and where you're moving. So for her, what we did is we started testing that rise ball at high intensity only. We stopped measuring low intensity. I really started to pull away from her using so much overload, like so many constraints to get her arm into the right slot and into the right timing for backspin. So we started to really push that. For backspin, we were just measuring at high intensity, as I said, and then for top spin, trying to grow this drop ball concept for her, we really took on the same concepts that we did back with backspin development. We used weighted balls, 7 ounces. We even included a little bit of underload, not for velocity, but just for at low intensity to help her feel what it's like to unravel the forearm faster. So she was using those, and I was watching which weights really she did a better job of. Did she achieve better top spin at low intensity with slight overload, like 8, 9, 10 ounces, or does she actually get more at 5 ounces? And whichever one that she does a better job of, we kind of want to center our training plan around that. So it ended up being low intensity, or sorry, I should say underload for her at low intensity. That really was a great training environment. So we did that for top spin, and we took the same approach. Low and high intensity. Let's see how we're growing. It was much faster for her to be able to tap into top spin, because backspin is more challenging of the two. There's a reason why when pitches start to cluster together and ball flight data starts to regress, it all turns into sort of mediocre top spin. And so that is sort of more of like a regressed arm slot that you need. And it's simpler to be able to turn behind the ball. So for her, growing backspin was more of a feat. When she accomplished that, her ability to take those concepts and really figure out how to unravel the forearm sooner to create topspin was much faster for her. So what I can say is that she is now starting this portion of the roadmap where she is now in season prep. We're at the end of April, moving into May. And what we're doing now is we're trying to increase intensity. She spent all of this time, 3 to 4 months, training at the majority of the time low intensity to really establish what she needs. Now, is that the amount of time that's required? No, but she had it, so we took it. We wanted to really drill these concepts. So the reality is when we have pitchers where they're like, March 1st is my high school season. I have January's off season and February is preseason. We're talking like 4 to 6 weeks we spent on patterns. It's just not enough, but it's what we have. So you have to make it work, and you got to try to just go for it and get whatever can stick in that time frame to stick. But for her, she had the time, and we took every bit of it. So now in season prep, we are increasing her intensity, decreasing ball weight variability. So she's throwing a lot more at 100% intensity, measuring what's happening during that while she's throwing at that intensity. We're not spending so much time on overload because we're not trying to actively slow things down. We want to see the ball flight data that you were accomplishing in all of these constraints when you were training a lot at low intensity, when you were using different weights. As we're removing those concepts, what is happening to your ball flight data at 100% intensity from the rubber? We want to make sure that's staying stable. Now, what we easily could see here is that she starts to regress. And what we'll do, we'll put some of those training modalities, those training strategies back into the program. That's part of it. It's not a linear process. If she's able to stabilize her ball flight data 100%, awesome, we're going to keep moving. So I can't emphasize that enough. When it comes to these roadmaps, you have to understand what led to something. When it regresses, all you do is we just go back to the concepts that got her there in the first place. It's not a race to the finish line. You have to see where the athlete is in the moment and think about what's the current state that she needs to be in to support her, but also push her. So we were looking for, again, in this third column, consistent ball flight data as that volume and intensity increase. And that's where we are now and where she's moving when we go likely, if this is able to stable. So far, a couple weeks in it is. And now as we're going into the month of May, the next part of her roadmap is to translate this to live. We're going to be measuring with Rapsodo, look at her ball flight data with live at bats. We're going to be looking at the consistency between her training environment at high intensity and her live environments. And if that's a disconnect, then we'll go into the program and work through some things to try to bridge that gap. And if it's not a disconnect, she is ready to roll for the summer. So this is the roadmap for her. It started all the way back from poor patterns, poor arm slot, and less than special ball flight data. Yes, she's an amazing athlete. Yes, she was able to tap into change really quickly. But the reality is this is the way that we need to approach training for our pitchers if we want to actually get them somewhere, if we want to create change. Not to mention that the ability for pitchers to really buy into the process, you have to communicate these concepts to them. You have to show them this is what we're working on. I know it's boring to throw at low intensity a lot, but if you see what it's connected to, that is so much more, you're so much more likely to get that athlete's buy-in. And then for them to see on any given day when I'm training, I understand the concepts that I'm working on because I see the overall picture. It's not just a random day's workout with random drills that look fancy or that I'm going to post on social media. It's not about that. It's about things that are very specific to their plan, their roadmap, their assessment results. It's their roadmap. And I can't emphasize that enough. Okay, so I'm going to swipe over here, and what I want to show is currently where this athlete's ball flight data is. It's very steady. I just pulled, from about 2 weeks ago and then a week ago, her ball flight data. These are medians. Over here on the left, anything that says like SP2 or SP1 are just custom pitches. These are medians, and what you can see is she's establishing this down pitch. We're starting to grow that into about 5 inches at a medium, so that's on its way down. You can see at low intensity, she's doing a great job with that pitch, starting to reach about 6 inches. So that's growing. When she was throwing low intensity backspin, still that looks amazing up here. We're at like +5, and then she's back into this +3, +4 with rise ball. It's incredible. She's a high velo pitcher. She's in these mid to upper 60s, maintaining that velocity now as we're going into high intent. And this is her pitch profile. Over here, this is just as we shifted away from measuring all low intent, and what you can see is that, that data is holding. And are there times where we see like, okay, top spin looks like it regresses a little bit. We don't have those training modalities. Okay, we want to see that. We don't just chase the data when it looks good. We let the data inform us. And I can't emphasize enough, the data is not to prove you right. The data is to guide your next decision. So if her drop ball or her top spin starts to work its way up, but we knew that when she was training it a little bit more aggressively at low intensity, that it was in better shape, we got to put some of those training strategies back into her weekly plan. So this is really where she is as of now. And again, I just can't emphasize like how amazing it was to watch this athlete buy into the process, understand her process, and then tackle it and own it. I did not dictate exactly what she was doing. I did not dictate. Yes, I wrote her training programs, but I wasn't puppeteering her. I was communicating. I was designing the plan and communicating how that plan was based off of her assessment, the information we had for her, and really what I saw was going to get her to the next step, and beyond. And when she could see all of that, she was all in. And she took ownership and she committed. And now, obviously, she's in the best position from a velo standpoint, from a posture and mechanic standpoint, from a ball flight standpoint that I've ever seen her, and I'm so excited for her. So this I know was a lengthy episode. The case studies I think are just important to see from sort of start to finish, and I hope this was really a great way for you to see those pieces come together. Why do we want an assessment before we attack a training plan, or before we create a training plan? Why do we need that information up front? Why is it so important to make sure that we sort of lay out a plan? If you are sitting there and you're thinking, when I go and train for pitching, I train with an instructor and I show up and every week is different. Like that might look fancy for social media, but think of it in context of today's discussion. What is that linked to? How is that specific to you? If you look next to you and the pitcher, to your left or to your right is doing the exact same thing as you that day because it's Thursday, the third week of the month, and that's what you do on that day in your pitching sessions, walk out, because that is not what is getting us better. And it doesn't mean, that everyone out there is a bad coach, but we've created a bad training culture for pitchers because we simply just haven't had the information. And then I think if there's one thing that like in my heart, in my soul, that I really want to come through in these episodes is that we've been spending so much time here at S2 Breakthrough redesigning how to train pitchers and how to get more out of them. And we are at a place where we feel so confident in some of these strategies that we really want them to spread. They have to spread. We're stuck on a merry-go-round where pitchers are the same year after year. And these are the types of approaches that get them into the next level. These are the approaches that are true player development. So just a couple things to ponder if you're out there and kind of reflecting on the types of things you do in pitching sessions. If you're out there and you think that I'm performing at sort of like in a camp or in a game 12 months of the year, and how could I ever get better? Like imagine if this athlete had no off season, which a lot of athletes we work with, they don't. They have 6 weeks, 4 weeks of off season. Imagine what position we're putting them in. And so I wanted to kick off with this because it's sort of like a success story. It really shows things from sort of like bottom all the way up. Hope it was easy to follow. Just to reiterate, if you listened only, make sure you go back to YouTube to watch some of these visuals. Next week, I will bring you case study 2 where we look at another athlete's roadmap, which again, will be unique to her and only her. Thank you very much for joining. As always, between now and our next episode, remember to keep questing on to redefine the circle. Thanks, guys. Thanks for listening to today's episode. I'd love to connect and hear your feedback. You can contact me directly at ashley@s2breakthrough.com. If you're listening, you can leave us a review, or if you're watching, go ahead and leave a comment below. Also, be sure to follow S2 Breakthrough on all of our social media channels and subscribe to Stream S2 to find all things player development. Until next time, quest on.